The things that you love can be funded by Shopify technology. We make your life and your dreams possible.
That sounded pretty good.
Glenn, I am so excited for this. I've heard so many great things, from your love of pad thai to your learning the drums. This is just going to be a fun show, so thank you so much for joining me, man.
Oh yeah, happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Not at all, but I want to start with a little bit on you. So how did you make your way into the world of startups first, and then come to lead the product org at Shopify today?
I've had a winding and weird career that just looks stupid on paper, but I was a CompSci grad. I was a video game developer for 3 or 4 years. I ended up in San Diego. Basically, one of my high school teachers asked me to move to the States and run like the US warehouse of him and his wife's eco-friendly shopping bag business, I was like, I want to move to the US, let's do this. And so I ended up in San Diego in a warehouse with forklifts whizzing around me and, that kind of stuff. And I was like, I was a video game developer a second ago. What just happened? And as part of that business, which did a lot of wholesale business, I ended up going to a lot of trade shows in New York and being on the floor of the Javits Center. And, I would be writing orders in these order books for like when, people would come to the booth and say, I want to have your bags in my store. And so after doing a bunch of these trade shows, I kept thinking, well, there should be an iPhone app for entering these orders. This writing orders in books thing is like a nightmare. And so after a while, I just kept thinking someone would build an iPhone app for this, and it just kept not happening. And so after a couple of years of that, I was just like, fuck it, I'll just download the Xcode. I'll download Xcode, I'll learn Objective-C, haven't coded in a couple of years, let's go. And I built a prototype of what eventually became Handshake, which is just literally an iPhone app for entering orders at a trade show. I moved to New York around the same time, and then what happened? I basically applied to go to business school, went to business school, went for 1 day, and then I was like, actually, this is kind of not what I want to be doing. I'd actually rather be coding 12 hours a day. And so I quit business school, and then Handshake just happened, and that's where my old friend Mike Elmgreen came on board as my co-founder to run sales and marketing. I think you met Mike, and he's probably told you all the trash about me.
He told me so much trash. Before we dive into Shopify, I just have to ask, man. I actually tweeted recently that the best founders I work with have a background in either game design or being exceptional, like game players themselves. Why do you think game design or being very skilled at gaming leads to very high quality, talented founders?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think whether it's video games or even like traditional games like chess or something like that, I mean, I guess you have to have a very analytical mind and a very competitive mind to like want to keep basically smashing your head against the wall at the same thing over and over and over and over again, and like getting better and better and better and better at it in a way that's usually very frustrating, but like sort of fun at the same time. And I guess in a way, like founding a company and building a product is an exercise in smashing your head against the wall repeatedly and like only getting better slightly, right? And then getting a little nibble of cheese every so often that makes you feel good, but mostly an exercise in losing, right?
And the cheese is called secondary. So tell me, so the Handshake comes to be, you and Mike, and then what happens? You get acquired by Shopify. What happens?
Right. So yeah, Mike and I built. We'll fast forward 9 years. So we built the company, and ups and downs for 9 years. It was a great experience. Obviously we learned a ton. Towards 2018, 2019, we got to know some of the folks at Shopify. Shopify was in this zone where it was kind of towing around the edges of like starting to do some wholesale stuff. We were like specialists in only doing wholesale e-commerce. And then it just kind of came to be that it was like, hey, let's do this. Let's get together. 1 + 1 = 2, or 1,000 + 1 = 2,000, however you want to phrase it. But yeah, and then so since I've been at Shopify, I've basically had 3 roles since I've been here. My initial role was just doing the wholesale thing, did that for about the first year. And that was, for the most part, running the Handshake team within Shopify. And then I spent the first year of the pandemic in 2020 moving over to run checkout. So that was a year in which there was some really fundamental things in the checkout that needed to be fixed like rather promptly. And so Toby asked me to move over and basically like run what's called a code red on checkout. And that code red went...
Code red?
code red is everyone drop everything. Like, this is the most important project. Like, if the people running this project ask you to do something on their project instead of what you're already doing, like, please do it.
And when Toby says code red, you're not like, no, I'm going to have my work-life balance.
Yeah. That doesn't sound optional.
I love that. Actually, that was your second, and then third was how did that come to be?
Yeah, so at the end of 2020, the code red was wrapping up, and the checkout was in a much better place. And actually, one of the things that was sort of instructive for both Toby and me in that code red was that, like, the previous, and this sort of gets to like Conway's law and like org chart shipping, and this is a thing that all PMs eventually like run into and like gnash teeth at. But the old org structure of Shopify, like 2020 and maybe for the 3 or 4 years trailing, was that there was something like, I think there was something like 12 or 13 different what we called product lines, which are basically divisions, and each one had their own full stack, like product engineering, UX, data, everything, and they all had their own little part of the product they were responsible for. And it turned out that one of the reasons that the checkout got into so much trouble was that a lot of the fundamental problems that existed in the checkout required multiple of these divisions to collaborate, because again, like, the checkout kind of bridges like everything in Shopify. And so when you have this org that's cut on all these lines, it suddenly gets really hard to coordinate solutions that bridge the lines, right?
Man, that's insane. I always laugh there, and I say that, the more tenured an exec is, I always want to play a drinking game, which is the more that they say alignment, I have to take another shot. Alignment comes up about 15. Alignment. You've mentioned code red there. We're jumping around schedules, but I'm loving it.
Yeah.
You mentioned code red, and I did my research. Obviously, I stalked the shit out of you, and I heard that you have this product framework to ensure you build the right products with the least amount of misalignment.
Yeah.
There we go. What does that mean?
Did you mean a framework other than just being an opinionated arsehole?
Well, preferably, yes, or an Australian.
Those are synonyms. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Look, I do my best. I mean, I think at some level you can't reduce product to frameworks, because if you could, like, we wouldn't have you know what I mean? It's just one of those things where at its base, product management is making good decisions about what to build and when. Mm-hmm. And at some level, you can't just reduce that to frameworks, but you do want to reduce the amount of wasted work that just goes in the trash can, which is like wasteful, it's frustrating, it's shit, everyone hates it. One of the things that I have encouraged teams at Shopify to do, especially in core, so like core is now about half of R&D in Shopify, right? And core is what the outside world would think of as like the built-in bits when you sign up for Shopify. So like the stuff you get in the box, it's like the online store, the checkout, all of the back office, all those bits, that's core. And that's about half of the R&D team, which is what I currently oversee product for. And so you can imagine there's a lot of teams in there. Like at any given time, there could be like 1,000 projects running. Can't look at all of them, can't dive into all of them. So the framework that I try to have people think about is, I like to ask people to sketch out like your outcomes, your assumptions, and your principles at the start of a project, because these are the places where things can go off the rails, and it's really good to catch those things early, because you can just like find, let's get ahead of this, because you're going to go off in the wrong direction here.
Can we actually take an example? So outcomes, assumptions, principles.
Sure.
How would we do one of those? I'm sorry for the naive question.
Yeah.
What's an example?
Let's start with outcomes, because probably the easiest.
Sure.
Outcomes is like, how do we know this is going to go well? Like when this is all done, like you're telling me you want to run this project and it's going to take 10 engineers for 6 months. At the end of this, how are we going to know that it was worth it, right? It's a really easy question. And like often you'd be surprised how often teams do not have an answer to this question.
And so what makes a good answer? Like a measurable, definable, binary yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, look, some things can be measured by numbers. Like sometimes you can say, hey, I want to take a conversion rate from X to Y. I want to take a performance metric from Z down to P. Sometimes the answer is a metric. Not everything is a metric though. Like sometimes the answer can be, when Toby looks at this page, he's not going to vomit anymore, right? Like it can be something subjective, because sometimes the work we do is really aesthetic work. It's like, make this page beautiful. It's goddamn awful right now. So, but just being clear up front on like really, like, hey, when you do this project, when we come back 6 months later and I ask you, did it go well? How are you going to answer that question? Like, let's just agree up front what the format of your answer is going to be, so we all know what we're actually working towards. And you'd be surprised the number of times people don't even know what the answer to that is, or people have different answers to what that's going to be.
Okay, so that's outcome. Next.
Principles are probably the most difficult and counterintuitive, but principles are basically, how are we going to make the very hard decisions, the 51-49 decisions, that reasonable people could take either side of in this project. Like, we can anticipate that there are going to be some forks in the road in here, and reasonable people might take either side. And as a team, we all want to go into one side, right? Like, we don't want to do this thing where half of us are pulling in one direction, half of us are pulling in the other. And so principles tend to be things like, I'll give you a good example. So like, obviously at Shopify, we serve primarily 3 constituents, like the merchants who run their businesses on Shopify, developers who build apps and themes on Shopify, and then the buyers who are buying from Shopify stores, right? So we have these 3 constituents that are always circling. So a principle you might put into a project would be something like, in the cases where the interests of merchants and developers conflict, we are going to break for merchants every time, right? Now, different people might take reasonably either side of that argument, but it's really bad if half the team is taking one side and half the team is taking the other, right? And so a good principle, like when you can see that a project is going to have like reasonably, like is going to have these conflicts in it, it's good up front to say like, hey, when we hit this fork in the road, we're all going left, so that the team doesn't just like split in half and start destroying itself.
How often do those conflicts arise actually? When you actually look at those 3 different stakeholders, to what extent is that common versus not?
Very, very often, right? Especially at the scale Shopify exists at, right? Like it's often the case that you have to trade off against, and it's not always between those 3 constituents. You might even have trade-offs between like small merchants and large merchants. Like, how do we think about the needs of very small businesses? So once your businesses make commerce better for everyone, like everyone's a pretty big word, and like the interests within everyone tend to conflict quite a bit. And so you do need to anticipate these conflicts and try to get ahead of them.
And then what was the third, sorry?
Assumptions. So assumptions are actually one of the, this is often where I get into these very funny conversations with Toby, where we're like railing at each other about I'm like, I can't believe you want to do this. And he's like, it's insane to me that you want to do that. And then we get into the bottom of the conversation, and what we realize is that there's a different assumption at the bottom. Like we have some foundational assumption about reality that's different, which explains why we are talking past one another.
So what would an example be of an assumption?
Let's go back a few years when, like mobile is on the rise, right? You could see someone building like a mobile product for Shopify, or maybe like a mobile web mode for Shopify, where in the back of their head, they're like, okay, mobile's on the rise. I assume that like all web traffic is going to eventually become mobile, right? And so like the way they're building the product becomes like very extreme, because they're like basically all online shopping is eventually going to be mobile. And another person might have an assumption that's like, hey, I agree mobile's on the rise, but I think it's going to asymptote somewhere around like 60% of all web traffic, which means that 40% is still going to be desktop, which means desktop's still very, very, very important. And if two people on the same team have those 2 different assumptions, the product that they're going to end up building is going to be wildly different, and they're not going to understand why.
Can I ask, what's the most challenging element or segment of this framework? Which is the one that's like, this one's always the fucking hardest?
The one that is done the least well is probably weirdly the outcomes one, and partly because that's, especially in my team in core, a lot of what we do in core tends to be fairly low in the stack. So it's like there are some things at Shopify that are very close to financial results that are like, hey, our capital product, it's really easy to point to, okay, we did this thing and this many more dollars came in. But for many of the core features of like a developer platform or a commerce platform, it's really hard to tie like, oh, we moved this, we made this part of the UX better and this many more dollars came in, because it's like, it's just like the web of dependencies is so insane, you can never really unpack it. And so
I think the hardest thing that I've learned actually on like objectives and goal setting is like not making them gameable. I realized this last week when, with my investment team, I was like, we need to meet 20 companies a week. Well, you could meet 20, anyone can meet 20 companies a week, but you just meet your corner shop. That's a company. Do you know what? It's like they have to
This is the marketing is red, sales is green problem, like that I used to have at Handshake, which is one of the things, sorry, we're getting off product now, but like,
that's great.
One of the things that like you always see you often see in go-to-market organizations is that because sales and marketing people are very like goal-oriented and like often compensated on the numbers, they really want numbers that they're in control of. Like they really want the number that they're going to be paid on to be a number that they actually control.
Yeah.
And so this leads marketing teams to want to declare goals that are about like the marketing funnel, but not the bottom of the sales funnel, which is exactly what you just said. Like, oh, I met 20 people this week. Well, were 19 of them homeless? Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't. I
totally get you. But even if you have it on like converted dollars or acquisition, it's not tied into retention. You could just everything to get them over the line, then be shittier quality leads that churn after 2 months, but you've actually hit your numbers.
Exactly. And this is when you get into the weird parts in businesses where, God, the marketing's doing great, but sales is doing terrible. What's going on? Or like marketing and sales are doing amazing, but customer success seems to be like really struggling. What's up with that?
Can I ask you mentioned there about kind of being close to the finances in the products that we build. How do you, and this is a really tough one I find with products, how do you balance in terms of product decision making between what's generating revenue today and innovation for the future?
I think the closer you are to the bottom of the stack, the more responsibility you have to build for the future. I mean, it's just like there's basically a direct relationship between like in a platform that has like primitives, APIs, going all the way up to like the user-facing features in the apps. Like the closer you are towards the bottom of the stack, you really need to be thinking about the long-term future. It's actually one of the things that I've learned. When you're in a startup, you have a bias towards thinking towards like basically on a 1 to 2 year time frame because that's how much cash you have.
Yeah.
And one of the super refreshing things about being at Shopify has been actually two things. One is because Toby's had basically a 15-year bull run of like, I mean, it's been hard, but he's mostly been an outrageously successful technologist. He has like built up this immense muscle memory for being like, I'm always thinking to 5 to 10 years out on like, where's the internet going to be and like, what's going to happen to the world of trade and like that. So he's like awesome at 10 years and he's awesome at what can we do this week. Whereas like people like startup founders who are more like, man, we're always trying to get to the next round. We're really trained on this like 1 to 2 year hamster wheel of like, what do we need to do in the next 1 to 2 years? One of the things I had to learn at Shopify was understanding when you build APIs, when you build new primitives, when you build things into the base layer of a platform that has millions of merchants, tens of thousands of developers, when you make those fundamental changes, how is it going to reshape the world of like the internet and trade for the next, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in a way that you don't think about at startups? Because at startups, you don't have 10% of internet e-commerce running on you, right?
Sadly not.
Sadly not, right? And this is like, when Apple makes a decision like, hey, we're going to change ITP and ATT. It's like you change one little thing, but because it's so close to the bottom of the stack, it literally reshapes the entire planet. And so that's when you have to be thinking about the long term because of the effect it's going to have on the world.
Can I ask you, you speak about kind of the effect on the world and the product magnitude there. You mentioned kind of, I think it was like the 14 different teams earlier.
Yeah.
How do you think about retaining simplicity in product with great depth of customer base and great needs? How do you retain that simplicity?
I mean, look, in the product itself, there's really only two solutions to, like, if you want to do the stretch up thing, which is something we say at Shopify about, like, we serve people who are like, it's like literally a 12-year-old kid running a lemonade stand up to, like Supreme and like, JB Hi-Fi and like all these insane companies. If you really want to stretch like that, there's very, very, very few pieces of software that have ever adequately served both ends of that market. And the only two pieces of leverage you really have to allow that stretch is one is extremely good execution of progressive disclosure in the core product. So like features that appear at the right time only when you need them. A good example of this is something like the canonical example of this is like users and permissions management in business software, right? Like when you only got one user, you literally do not need user and permissions management because there's nothing to do, right? So the user and permissions management thing being there is literally making the product worse because there's nothing to do and it's just adding complexity, right? So part A is progressive disclosure of like what I would describe as anti-features, like a feature that makes the product worse by being there because it's not needed yet. Mm-hmm. And then the second thing, which is probably the bigger piece of leverage, is an app platform and an app ecosystem, right? Which is, apps can be built on top. They extend the platform with functionality that doesn't have out of the box. But the really critical thing here is you need two things. One, and they're actually basically conjoined at the hip. One is you need an app platform that allows apps to be built that are of equal quality to the core features of the platform. That is absolutely critical. And like, look at iOS. iOS is like a great example of this. Like when I open up a first-party app like Messages, and I open up a third-party app like Spotify or Lyft or something, the third-party apps are as good quality as the first-party apps because they're all built on the same toolkit, and Apple made the tools available such that third-party apps could be as good as the first-party apps. This strategy does not work if the third-party apps are all trash and it's only the first-party apps that are actually good. But if you have an app platform that basically gives the same tools to third-party developers that the first-party ones have, then you enable this rich ecosystem of actually high-quality apps that allow the large enterprises to scale up because they add apps as they need them, but the core product stays simple for the people who don't need that yet, which is, again, just part of that stretching. And I guess apps, in a way, are a form of progressive disclosure.
Can I ask, Glenn?
Yeah.
What was the biggest, oh, God, that was hard when building the Shopify app ecosystem? We see it today, but what was the big,
Actually, one of the things that we added last year, I would argue, has been one of the most insane technical challenges. So we added a thing last year called Shopify Functions. The traditional problem with making SaaS platforms extensible is that they're all hosted in the cloud, right? So like Shopify is running its own servers and we're hosting all the websites and all the back offices and whatever. And then if you're an app developer, you really want to be able to, like, we've always given people ways to have their own UI and that part of it works. But when the third party wants to run its own logic inside of Shopify, we could never really do that because it's insecure, right? It's like, we don't want to take your code and run it on our servers because what if you're a hacker and you write something and it gets out and it starts like stealing people's data and doing bad stuff, right? So what happens is we ended up having to say you have to run your code on your servers, but now you have like these horrible performance problems because it's like, our servers are trying to talk to you and everything's just getting slower and it's getting awful, right? So we released this thing last year called Shopify Functions, which leverages a technology called WebAssembly. And it allows us to take logic written by third-party developers, compiled down to this thing called WebAssembly, which we can run in like secure environments that are safe on our servers. And now we have this like magical best of both worlds thing, which is like we can take third-party code and we can run it on our servers. So we're getting the third-party code, but we're getting all the performance benefits as if Shopify wrote it ourselves. And now you get this like perfect harmony of the benefits of like a fully hosted SaaS platform, but also the benefits of like fully third-party applications. And that was a very, very difficult thing to overcome. And as far as I'm aware, Shopify was the first at-scale SaaS platform to do that. And that's been a problem in SaaS and software forever until last year. So like that was really difficult, that one.
No wonder you look so young. Poor you having to go with that. In terms of the teams, like the 14, honestly, it gave me shivers. How do you structure the team now to be much more aligned and cohesive?
I'll tell you like an ugly little secret here. So like we had 14 teams or 13, I don't know how many there were. And about 7 or 8 of them got combined into the thing that's now called Shopify Core, which is the thing that I run. And part of what we learned in Code Red was, hey, these teams aren't aligning and stuff wasn't getting done and the checkout was getting worse. And so I was like, great, let's put them into this thing called Core So now it's just one team, and that will help us align better, and therefore the checkout won't have these problems, and we won't have this code red thing happen again. Dirty little secret, the day after Toby was like, hey, Glenn, cool, you run these 8 teams together, these 8 teams now, like, please smush them all into one. I was like, great, thank you. And the first thing I did was I split core into 8 teams.
Why?
Because, well, you need an org chart. You need a way of organizing teams together in same sizes that can actually work together.
The 8 teams, surely that creates silos, it creates barriers of communication, information slippage.
Of course it does. But like the Dunbar number is the Dunbar number, right? Like, which is the number of people that anyone can like reasonably deal with without having like a brain aneurysm, right? So there's just a physical limit on how many people. So like, just so you know, core is about 2,500 people, right? And there's now 10 of these teams inside core. So they're about 200 people each, which is about the Dunbar number, which is not a coincidence. But here's the thing. In the old org structure, the first point in the org chart where all those 14 teams actually like joined at the top was Toby. So anytime someone has an escalation, the first point in the escalation tree was Toby, which if, you know, he's a public company CEO, like that's not a reasonable expectation for someone like Toby to have to take on. So the thing that works better now than it did before is that there's a team including me, my head of design, my head of engineering, head of data, head of product marketing. We sit above these 10 teams, but we are actually like, we consider our jobs to be understanding what's going on in these teams, handling the escalations, making sure that like, you know, when kid A and kid B both want to go to university, we're like, you know what? You get to go to university, you don't. You get to be happy, you get to be sad. But the good news is no one's confused about what we're doing. And in the old world, confusion used to just sit there for like, you know, teams could be at odds for like 6 months and they'd be like, well, I want to do this. And they'd be like, well, I want to do that. And they'd be like, well, are we escalating to Toby? And it's like, I don't know. I don't know if we should do that. And then you just sit there for 6 months and it's like frustrating.
Glenn, I want to ask you about kind of team management in particular, because I heard so many different elements about your leadership skills. What works and what doesn't?
Was skills in quote marks or was it clean?
Well, I mean, there were skills and challenges. I just thought I would admit the challenges and be more polite. I'm British, you know, we're charming. But so my question to you was, what works and what doesn't in how you run product teams? I know it's blunt and bland, but I do just want to stop there.
Well, I can tell you what people would have said doesn't historically, but I think it's become, at least at Shopify, I think we've embraced this style of leadership a bit more in the last few years, which is we have this thing inside of Shopify now called, and when this first was released, I was like, this sounds so stupid, but I've actually come to really appreciate it. Have this idea of like aiming, assembling, and achieving. Aiming is like deciding like, here's the direction we're going in, here's what we're doing, right? Assembling is like, you could think of it as like the operational part, like how do we get the people, the resources, the timing, the meetings, blah, 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 to actually do this. And then the achieving is the actual doing. It's like coding, designing, whatever, like actually doing the work to do the thing. I would say my style of leadership and Toby's and Kaz's, and I would say this is actually common to basically all of the leadership at Shopify now, is the willingness to be a senior aimer where you say, I think the product should be this, and like I insist we go in this direction, which is, if we're being honest, like of the past 10 years, there sort of was the flavor of the month was like sort of bottoms up everything, like power to the edges, like whatever you want to describe that thing as. But the problem with power to the edges and bottoms up decision making is that the value of a product like Shopify, or the value of not even a product, like a product suite, like, because Shopify has many products, right? And look at Apple, right? Like Apple's like the Mac, the iPhone, the iPad, the watch, the everything. The value of that suite is to a large extent the way it all works beautifully together, right? And if all the decisions are coming from the edges, the chance that it's all going to work together and like feel like it came from the pen of a single creator just goes through the floor, right? And that's what makes using an iPhone and an iPad such an amazing experience, is that it really does feel like it all came from the hand of a single creator. And you need at some point for there to be a single hand on the wheel in order for that to be true.
My friend, can I ask, do you agree with disagree and commit?
I do, yeah.
You think people will disagree and commit in the same way as if they agreed?
Oh, I don't think they don't move down the field quite as fast, but there is a difference between moving downfield at 80% speed and like literally digging your heels in.
Yeah. Okay. Have you had problems there? I've had problems there where it's like, fine, I'll do it. And it's like done shittily. And you're like, fuck's sake.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure I have. I'm sure that I've had those. I know I have. I mean, yes, for sure. And I think sometimes that's a problem with the person who's disagreeing and not really committing.
Yeah.
And maybe they just have to say, I disagree with this way of running a company. I disagree with this product direction. And I should just leave the company. Sometimes it's a failure of the leadership to explain why they're aiming in a particular direction. Like I think saying like, we're going over here and just fucking do it is quite different than saying we're going over here. Here's why, let's do this together.
Well, I think there's two things here, and I want to ask you about both of them. It's like the how and the why. And I think the why is the storytelling. And Marika told me that you're an exceptional storyteller. How do you think about telling that story to the team as to why you made the decision and why they should follow you?
This storytelling thing was beaten into me, like almost like as an existential threat when I was like trying to raise money at Handshake. I had this like, let me spend a couple of minutes here because I think it's worth it. Like I was a member of a CEO peer group when I was running Handshake. And this is when we were coming up. We had done our Series A. We're on the way to the Series B. And I was a member of a CEO peer group that met in San Francisco. I was from New York. So I'd fly out there once every 3 months and do the meetings. And I went to the first meeting, and most of the guys in the peer group were CEOs of tech companies or biotech companies. But one of the guys in the group was the managing partner of a VC fund. And his name was Phil. And on the first one of these meetings, each founder got up and like did the little pitch for their business. And I got up and I was like, yeah, it's Handshake and it's wholesale. And like, there's these sales reps and there's these businesses and they need to like trade. And like, it's a huge problem. And we've got this mobile app and blah, 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 blah. And I told my whole thing. And I think most people in the room were like, oh, we totally get it. Like, you know, we see the business thing here. And at the dinner that evening, Phil kind of like sat down next to me at the dinner and he was like, hey man, it's like, tell me the story. And I was like, I did tell you the story. And he's like, no, man, tell me the story. Tell me something that I can like feel. And I was like, oh yeah, it's this wholesale thing and there's the truck lifts and there's the FedEx trucks and there's the iPads and there's the order books and blah, blah, blah. He's like, no, dude, tell me a story. And he beat me into the ground over like, I don't know, I must have sat there with him for an hour with him just being like, no, just tell me the story over and over and over and over again. And I eventually got to a story that was, I literally ended up making it up on the spot. I was like, you know, when you go into a store and you walk in there looking for a particular thing and you want a white t-shirt in a particular size and you go to the shelf where that shirt should be and it just isn't there. And it should be there. That is literally what we are doing. We help the companies with the shirts make sure that they get to the right stores in the right time so that when you get to the store, the shirt that you expect to be on that shelf is actually there. And just multiply that by all the people in the world and all the shelves in the world and all the number of times that you've gone there and it's not been there. That's what we're solving. That's not even a very good story. But finally, Phil was like, I get it. I could explain that to my mum and she'd actually understand what you did. And since then, I've just understood that I'm like, if you do not tell someone a story that they can see themselves in and they can like empathize with, you can say all the numbers in the world, you can describe all the processes and analysis in the world. No one gives a shit. No one's got time for your shit. And so like, I really, really, really try to encourage people to find a way to tell the story. Like humans are emotional creatures. And like, if you can't get me to feel something, I'm probably not going to care no matter how many numbers you throw at me, you know?
I totally do. Before we touch on like that, how in terms of the communication, what do you do if you have two different personas? Say you have the customer and the retailer. The story may differ. Do you see what I mean? The pain is different. What do you do then if you're storytelling? You just have different messages for different personas?
You can, but I mean, at the end of the day, like you really do need to, you need a story that you want. The best stories work for everyone, right? Like they don't make two versions of Aladdin. There's one version of Aladdin. And like you just, great stories work. And I just think until you can get there, you're not really doing your job.
And how do you say that then to your team? Like, is this stand up at an all hands and say, that feeling when you go into the store and there's no t-shirt?
How do I tell the story to my team?
How do you imbue that to them and make them feel it?
I don't actually know what the answer to this is, because I think this is another one of those things that if there was an answer, like everyone would be an amazing storyteller. I think people respond to authenticity in stories. I think people can tell when you mean it. Like, I think people can tell when you, the speaker, actually feel the thing. I think it's just like the passion and the enthusiasm that you tell the story with. And
would you ever
the extent to which you've made it relatable.
Would you ever tell a story you don't feel?
I can't. That's one of my problems, is that like sometimes people give me scripts to read and I'm like, I'm not going to read this bullshit, because if I did, you would hate how I would read it, because everyone would know I didn't mean it.
Yeah, I totally get that. Can I ask, in terms of the communication, how do you, I think a lot of founders struggle with the repetition. Like, how important is repetition in storytelling?
All the time.
All the time.
All the time. You need to keep saying the thing. Like, you'd be shocked how fast people forget things. Like, this is why compelling storylines with just like memorable sound bites are so important, because you only get to lodge like a few words in someone's brain before like every word you add pops one out their other ear. And you only get to choose like maybe 3 words you can lodge in someone's brain at any given point in time, and you really need to choose what they are.
Do you think startups tell good stories? I think when it comes to product marketing, I'm always horrified at the state of product marketing. I'm just like,
yes.
Okay, sorry, this is really unfair of me. I was going onto the Shopify site, but I was just too interested. The global commerce platform. Do you think that's like build your business with Shopify to sell online, offline, and everywhere in between?
Mm-hmm. Well, you tell me. What do you think Shopify does based on just the words that you just read?
I think it's just a bit bland, isn't it? It's a bit boring. I mean, that's a bit like custard. I want empowerment. We deliver dollars to your pocket to pay for your children's favorite hobbies. And we do that through our incredible software, which lets you sell cookies or Chanel. I don't care. But the things that you love can be funded by Shopify technology. We make your life and your dreams possible.
That sounded pretty good.
Fucking A. You see why me and Harley get on now.
But dude, I totally agree. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna, I think our .com could be a lot better. Like, I'm not gonna trash it too hard right now, but
no, by the way, I do this with a lot of people, and I've never ever had anyone who's been like, no, actually it's great. So
yeah, no, I mean, look, I think software product marketing is an insanely difficult thing to do well.
Yeah.
I think so I loved the message you just delivered. One of the hard things that happens when you get to Shopify scale, which is not an excuse, but it's a thing that is a fact, is that, I mean, Toby's had the mission of Shopify make commerce better for everyone for a long time. But if you cycle back 5 years, what everyone actually meant was mostly pretty small businesses, mostly selling fashion, mostly in North America.
Yeah.
Right? Shopify today is actually getting a lot close to like actually everyone. And so coming up with a message that resonates for all countries, all sizes of business, all industries, online, offline, all the stuff, you do eventually start to hit the problem you're describing. And again, I agree with you. The blandness does tend to seep in, because you're like, well, got to talk to everyone. Like, you get into like how do you market tied kind of problems, And so
I'm with you totally. But what I find with especially a business like Shopify is, okay, that message that I deliver will absolutely get the lower end of the market in terms of size, that kind of long tail. For Mr. Beast, for Supreme, for the creator, they're not going to be put off by that, but also they're not going to be swayed by a more enterprise boring message. You're probably still a net plus on my story, but they're going to be coming to your C-suite, having big discussions in big boardrooms with, files and pens like important people do, and doing big enterprise deals. They're not like, let's sign up with super.
Yeah, I got my first pen when I made CEO. It was a big day for me. Yeah.
But do you see what I mean? So they're not going to sign up anyway. As long as you get the long tail with the messaging on the site, and then you can acquire and grow with them, the Supremes and Mr. Beasts, they come in top down anyway.
Well, it's not even, Supreme and Mr. Beast are actually examples of people who I think your message would land with. It's not so much them, it's more like legacy risk-averse retail is the group. It's like Sears, is going to come, they're going to see the message you just said and they're going to be like, maybe we should go to Salesforce. That feels a bit more safe. Feels like they're probably going to give us some nice brochures. Maybe that'll feel better.
Or are they actually going to be listening to Toby's quarterly report and going, "This guy's"?
Well, this is the hard thing.
Do you know what I mean?
You're getting to the art, the true art of product marketing, which is how do you have a message which still speaks authentically to who you are and what you actually give a shit about without alienating an unacceptably large part of your customer base. I guess this is the art.
I guess for me, and sorry, this is so unfair of me. I'm just passionate about it. I
beat me up.
The best brands build armies. You're for or against, and I think with Shopify, you have the chance to create a really powerful collective, almost, of the people who are enabled, empowered, and built by Shopify. Not it's our infrastructure.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's I
agree. Yeah.
I want Shopify to be a media company. I want to see your business owners in Hawaii surfing and their fucking life Hawaii having coconut cocktails paid for by their store, which is powered by Shopify, combined with the ski guide who's taking, teenagers skiing for a living, but sells jackets as well on Shopify. Where's the magazine? Where's the TikTok?
I agree with you. I agree.
Anyway. I'm going to have a go at Toby for this next week. That might not go so well. But speaking of kind of Toby, that's really unfair of me, actually. I'm sorry. Ben told me that you were exceptional and had an uncanny ability to manage up. What do you think he meant by this? And how do you think about managing up?
Well, the thing that is important to state as a fact here is that Toby, like all great CEO founders, is actually the head of product at Shopify and will always be. I think the day that Toby's not running a product at Shopify is the day that he's not at Shopify. I run half of product, but I don't run all of product.
Would you like
my
to?
Job... Sorry?
Would you like to?
I don't think it would be... So the part of the product that I run has a specific focus that I think would be diluted if I had to take on more. I could, but I'd be less good at the part that I do, and the part that I do is pretty fucking important. And what I'm really getting at there is if you read Stratechery and you know about platform aggregator theory. The part of Shopify that I run is really the platform part, and there are other parts of Shopify, namely Shop and Shopify Logistics, which are more aggregator plays. And I think the strategy and execution of platform businesses and aggregator businesses are fundamentally different. The best businesses are the ones that can actually do both and find the touch point between both, and that's why. It's actually part of why I find working in Shopify so exciting right now, is because the aggregator part of Shopify, Shop, has now reached such critical mass that the things that we can do by combining the Shop buyer base with the Shopify core platform are starting to become exponentially valuable versus what either of those two things can do individually. And by the way, basically all of our competitors are just pure platforms, which is why, I mean, these days, not to toot our own horn, but these days I'm like, I'd be fucking terrified to be competing with Shopify in commerce. Not, we have a great platform, but like we've got it joined at the hip to an incredible buyer aggregation engine, which is just it's hard to overcome how powerful that is.
Does Shopify compete with Amazon in 5 years?
Well, I mean, Shopify competes with Amazon today.
But like in terms of scale and magnitude? Like...
Oh, absolutely. 100%. 100%.
You're still a founder, Glenn. I love this.
Give me, just say like, hey, there's a war over there, and I'll be like, great.
I'm in. Yeah. Made sure a great podcast guest. I do want to do one final question before we do a quick fire. And it's, I think you learn a lot from mistakes that one makes in terms of strategic mistakes. Can you take me to a product decision that you made that was a mistake? What did you learn and what was that process?
There was a mistake strategically underneath Handshake that basically was an ongoing tax for its entire lifetime that I think was a tax that we sort of ended up being like pretty tough. And this was misreading what I would call like the arrow of progress in technology. So when I started Handshake, which was in 2010, and remember I described like, you know, a lot of it was about working at trade shows, like, you know, sales reps out there on the road. And this is in the era where like LTE and like 3G and stuff like just wasn't very good. And so a lot of the use case for Handshake was assuming that the person might be offline, right? And so a huge amount of the tech stack of Handshake was built around this fundamental assumption that the user might be offline and you might need to have basically pre-synced all of the data down to the device that would be necessary for the job to continue to work offline, right?
Gotcha.
That was actually like the killer feature when we launched. Like when we launched, everyone was like mind blown. They're like, I can't believe it. I'm on the basement floor of the Javits Center and it still works perfectly. And this is the best thing since sliced bread. And it basically a huge, like the combination of leveraging the launch of the iPad, which was in 2009, I think, and being excellent at working offline because nobody had iPads that had perfect 5G at the time. That was the killer feature, and that catapulted our growth for probably the first 2, 3, 4 years of the company. But then eventually, LTE was everywhere, 5G was everywhere, all the convention centers had Wi-Fi, all the stores on the road had Wi-Fi, like internet's everywhere now. And so suddenly, we've now got this feature which actually isn't that valuable because like there's basically internet everywhere, and we've got an insane amount of technical debt sitting in the product that is specifically designed to cope with offline situations. And so we basically kind of hit an inflection point where it's like, okay, now we're not innovating as fast because we've just got this immense amount of tech debt that governs everything we do. And we've got a feature that increasingly no one gives a shit about. And so by misreading, like if you'd said to me in 2010, hey, Glenn, how long do you think it's going to be until there's literally internet connectivity everywhere? I might have actually sat down and thought, okay, how long is that really going to be? And how should I think about building a platform that knows that that is coming in whatever I would have guessed, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? I never really had that conversation with myself. And so I ended up I put a check in the mail that had a huge bill in it that we were ultimately never able to pay down.
That's a stressful moment. Fucking hell. My friend, I want to do a quick fire round. So I say a short statement, you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Hit me.
So what was the last product that made you go, wow, like true user delight, and why?
Sorry, nerdy example, but this is my drum kit, like the Roland V drum kit. You would not believe how incredible like the way this thing works is, like the way the response is on cymbals and the drum heads, and like it's shocking how well this thing emulates like the feel of a real drum kit.
Head versus heart, what wins?
In the end, heart, which is bad for me because I'm basically a head guy.
Ideal relationship between CEO and VP product?
Like the relationship between the lead singer and the drummer in a band, just like jamming together all the time.
What's the biggest mistake that founders make when hiring product teams?
I don't think founders should ever say that. As the founder, if you ever say the words like this other person is the head of product, you just quit your job.
Why? That because you could have a sales-led founder. You don't have if you're an enterprise product, you
fair. If you started a company and you're explicitly like, I'm the business guy founder and this other guy is the product guy founder, fine. But like if you are a product founder like Toby, and like, look, let's be honest, most of the very, very successful tech companies, the founder is the product person.
Yeah.
The minute that person says this other person is the head of product, they've done one of two things. They've either quit their job or they have given that other person a title that everyone knows is bullshit, and they've basically given that person a death sentence.
Don't sit on the fence, mate. What is Shopify's biggest strength today? If you were to say the one reason why Shopify is fucking stellar, what would it be?
As a company, I would say it's that we have at pretty significant scale, there's 10,000 people in the company right now. I would say we are moving in terms of like actual innovation and like shipping. We are moving as fast as I've seen any other company of this scale. Like just go and look at the editions that we just put out. Like the number of features that we put out in this edition and the previous edition just 6 months ago, like it's all there in black and white. I don't think anyone can step to us in terms of how much like we're actually putting out right now. And then as a product, I would say it's the thing that I said a second ago. It's a product that has an incredible built-in user experience for the merchant. It has a developer platform that is becoming every month an incredible developer experience and like really powerful. And that this is the critical thing. It's a platform that is joined at the hip to an aggregator pool that is rapidly becoming the most powerful buyer population on the internet. And it's the combination of the platform success and the aggregator success that makes it like literally unstoppable.
What's the biggest weakness? Why are you like, oh God, we need to sort that out?
I think one of Shopify's challenges today is that we fundamentally do not control the top of the funnel, right? Like the top of the funnel for shopping is something else, right? It's a social media site, it's a news site, it's an ad on Google, it's somewhere else. You know, we're doing a lot of great stuff around Shopify audiences, Shopify buyers. We're doing stuff to help us help our merchants get to the top of the funnel. But at the end of the day, if you don't actually control any part of the top of the funnel, you are always downstream from someone else that you are depending on. And I think that is a fundamental strategic issue that we need to think about.
I think also it aligns that is like the recession proofness. Like when you have consumer demand down in a recession, obviously global trade.
It's direct access to your audience, right? It's like why Sam Harris can say stuff and like you can't cancel Sam Harris because he literally maintains direct control to his audience at all times, right? Yeah. And that's a different situation to be in.
Tell me, penultimate one, what would you most like to change about the world of product?
PMs are not going to like it when I say this.
Don't worry, only 300,000 PMs listen. What?
I wish PMs would be a little bit less fixated on the process and technique of PMing as a craft and just focus a little more on like, am I making good decisions? Do I do what I say I was going to do? Do I work well with the people that I work with? And do I get shit done? Like at the end of the day, the job isn't actually much harder than that. It's like, do you make smart decisions? Do you get shit done? Good? Great. And I worry a little bit that like PMs sometimes get very navel-gazy about what the art and science of being a PM is, to the point where I'm like, hey, can you just go do some work and like just be good at your job and like make great decisions and like ship products that make people happy? You know? I
find this with all like millennials, which is like they love to think and they love to plan, they love to be so thoughtful. Just fucking do it.
Exactly. And the best PMs are just like, the best PMs have this feeling about them where it's like a freight train that like if you try and stand in front of this thing, you're going to get fucking flattened, right? Like the best PMs have this sense of like, I'm building this thing, It's going to be great. Stand in front of me at your fucking peril. Like, let's go.
I love this. Listen, man, final one. What recent company product strategy have you been most impressed by?
I mean, we'll see how it plays. I mean, sorry, this is such a boring answer because literally everyone would give it. But like the way Microsoft is going at the AI thing right now is brilliant. I mean,
why do you think so?
Well, they correctly picked years ago that like partnering with OpenAI would be like incredibly strategic. I mean, lots of people knew that AI would be the thing, but the thing that they are doing right now with Bing and AI-driven search is that they are basically correctly realizing that Bing is a dead thing, right? Bing's dead, and like they've literally got nothing to lose, and they've got a business that is completely defensible in other revenue streams like Office and Windows and all the other stuff they do. Search is like a non-part of their business, but search is everything to Google. Like if search ads stop working, Google is not a thing anymore. And so they are swinging for the fences with a completely novel approach, which might not work, but if it works, basically completely alters the business of one of their competitors and like creates a business for them that could be really compelling. And if it doesn't work, who gives a shit? Bing was dead anyway.
Man, you're my fucking hero. I've loved this show. Glenn, honestly, thank you so much. Luke told me you'd be incredible. He was so right, but I've loved doing this. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Harry. Great to be here, Matt.